if any of you have ever shared your story in whatever capacity, you know the vulnerability and the courage that that takes. And so just want to thank you, Trish, for having that courage to come forward and to share with a bunch of very random people. But just thank you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for sharing your life with us. And thank you.
Wow, this is huge, huge turnout. Thank you all so very much. I'm trying to get out of the way of the light here. I don't know which way is easiest. Just step up on here. Is that better? Yeah, that's better. Hi everyone, I'm Trish. Unfortunately, well today I can say thankfully I'm a survivor of human trafficking, which affected 6 consecutive years of my childhood. But even more is what I've learned and what I've gone through in my recovery and what all of the amazing resources and networking that have come together from Eden's Glory to, the list is endless. There are more and more services being developed every day. Social workers and counselors are being more informed about trauma-informed response, as well as law enforcement. I do law enforcement trauma-informed response training over at SWIC Police Academy, which is wonderful. We get them new before they go out to their various departments, so that's really exciting. I do a lot of speaking and training. I'm a member of the Central Illinois Human Trafficking Task Force, as well as the National Association of Adult Survivors of Child Abuse. I am certified mental health first aid and DV education, as well as human trafficking. So this is just the complex life cycle of abuse and how it leads into human trafficking. Now, this presentation, I'm going to make it short, sweet, and easy for you to process as I possibly can. I don't want to trigger anyone. Some of the images that you see may be a little bit graphic. They may shock you a little bit. Unfortunately, mine is only one of some estimated 40 million people out there. And 25% of those are children. And when we live in these small, tight communities, there's more going on in the house and in the community than you might realize. So I just want to put that out there. If you do need to step out, grab someone, hold a hand, say a few words, take a breath, let it out, and at the end, I'm going to ask you to take another breath. So let's get started. This is actually the house that I grew up in. I'm trying to figure out how to, okay, where do I need to point this? Annie? You got it? Is it going? Ta-da, okay. So this is me at 5 years old. This is when my life started to change. Until then, I was a happy kid of a divorced family. 5 years old was the first molestation, first act of harm I had ever experienced, and it was my stepfather before, actually the night of my mother's bridal shower. At 9 was the first attempted rape. My mother actually walked in on the middle of the act, and instead of screaming and getting the police and getting me out of the house, I was yelled at and sent to my room for the evening. Wasn't allowed dinner, but come out to clean up the mess, and nothing was said any further. About 11, he first started arranging private parties with boys that I went to school with in town. He would get the alcohol and tell me who to invite, what to wear, what to allow them to do, and then want to come home and talk about all the ugly little details. At 12, there were multiples of violent rapes. I used to run away from home as a kid. Between the ages of 9 and 12, I ran away from home 3 times. Unfortunately, I was found, they brought me back home, and I stayed, and that's the way that it was. I actually went to my mother, asked my mother to help me because needed to stop these parties. I didn't like what I was having to do. And unfortunately, there was no response, no discussion, no argument, no nothing. It was just left. So definitely those acts and the threats that came with that act, you absolutely took my voice completely. I didn't talk about it again till I was in my late 30s. I just endured. At 13, there began, actually in what I refer to as being enslavement. I was the middle child. There were 4 kids in the house, my mother and stepfather, but I was the only one asked to answer to the ring of a little brass bell, literally. If he rang that bell, I needed to be there within seconds. Nobody else, no matter if they were in the same room or if they were standing right next to him, meant I couldn't go places, I couldn't have friends, I couldn't associate with anyone. So yes, it was definitely enslavement and became that party kid that he took to all the local bars, including the bar where my mother worked at the time. And instead of calling and reporting or getting help, they got me highly intoxicated. Double shots of vodka with orange juice, still can't drink it to this day, only because it really makes me nauseous. That's when he first started telling me, go over and play the jukebox and lure these men in. You've got to walk this way, you've got to talk to this person, and you've got to ask this guy and tell him that you want another drink. So I was being used for the price of a glass of draft beer in the middle 1970s. And it was happening in Plainview, right in the middle of Freeburg, where I went to school at every day, where everybody knew us. And of course, back then, those little bitty towns, everybody knew who I belonged to. So not a single word was said. At this time is when I decided, from the time that they got married, his thing used to be coming into the bathroom when I was showering. So at this time, I decided one of my defenses, I'm going to quit bathing. I can't bathe, it's not safe, it scares me. So I'm just going to quit bathing and then maybe I won't have to do these things. Unfortunately, it really didn't matter. Pardon me. Over the years, it was a lot of neglect. I still carry the scars to this day. At 17, it was setting me up to put a special trailer on a special private lot out in the country so that he could have his own special key and bring his friends over to have our own special parties. Now the parties with his co-workers started at around age 15. That would be anywhere from 5 to 10 adult men coming into our house about 1 o'clock in the morning to drink, get high, and party with a 13-year-old kid. Now my mother I can remember the day that she looked at me, he had called from work, said, hey, this is what you need to wear, this is what you need to get ready, this is what we need you to do. And unfortunately, she looked at me and said, have fun, as she went in her bedroom and closed the door. So she left me out there. My little sister was in her bedroom trying to sleep throughout all of it. Pornography is used a lot to lure and engage acts of trafficking. It was on the television, every single party. Drugs, alcohol, and for a few extra bucks, if they wanted to take me outside in the camper on the back of his pickup, that could be done as well. And after everybody left, I was the one that had to clean up the mess, and then of course tolerate his, tell me all the little details about what you liked. So that unfortunately was the life path of that little girl. So again, we lived in the center of town. For 6 consecutive years, I attended the same school system. I grew up with the same kids. People came to our house, family friends. They had tons of family friends from the coal mine and from the bar and the restaurant that my mother had worked at. So everyone knew us. Unfortunately, as if you can imagine, a little girl with covered with years of not bathing, who broke out in a skin infection and rotting front teeth and so on and so forth, and the stench and the filth, but nobody said a word. The failing grades, the lack of concern or care, the sexualized attitude that I had about things. All of the boys that I went to school with, you know, they would party with me on a Friday, Saturday night, and wouldn't say a word to me on Monday whenever they saw me at school with bruises all over me. So that's the norm. Of course, as I said, alcohol, marijuana, pornography were all involved. A lot of whispering, a lot of condemnation, a lot of blame on that person. You know, that was just a little girl. Just a neighborhood girl trying to grow up, trying to go to school, trying to do whatever it was she needed to do to survive. And it was a lot of the little tags and words that they used and condemnations that they used. By the time when the party started including adult men, there was not a single other parent that allowed their daughters to come to our house, and their sons were absolutely not allowed to date me. So they definitely knew what was going on. It was witnessed by many. Go ahead.
Sorry.
That's okay. Okay.
Oh dear.
You're on the right side. Yep. Oops. Okay. I know this looks pretty intense. Okay, this is what my skin looks like today. I cover it up as much as possible. I went through my entire life never having my husband or my boyfriend ever caress my skin. I was so ashamed of myself. But that didn't stop the trafficking. That didn't stop the drunken men that wanted to play with the little kid. So it really doesn't matter what a person looks like or what they are physically capable of or any type of filth, or that's not part of it. The part of it is a power and control that they can actually purchase and play with and use a human being, and especially when it's a child. So how it would have been preventable? Of course, you know, what about the teachers that saw me year after year, day after day? Somebody absolutely, we had child abuse reporting laws back in the 1970s. Somebody absolutely should have reported. The neighbors, the witness, thank you. Sorry. I'm like, wow, okay. But you know, neighbors that witness beatings, that witness men coming and going, that witness the alcohol, that witness the drug use, that saw me at the bars being sold and go out to the parking lot. There were times that my mother and my stepfather actually took me on their dates to use me as bait, to lure men in, to buy them drinks and feed me whiskey and 7-Up. I had to drink what my mother drank because if somebody did object, they could easily pull the drink in front of her. You know, partying, laughing, carrying on. I was a kid, and that classmates could have definitely helped, but they were just kids like me. And I'm certain I wasn't the only one in Freeburg that this was happening to. Family friends, they witnessed so much. They experienced so much. They saw how I had to answer to the ring of that bell. Saw so many welt marks and bruises and you name it. They saw the enslavement that I had to be as family caregiver, and I didn't go out with other kids on the weekends. I had to scrub, clean, polish, all of that good stuff. The bars could have definitely reported. I went to one dentist, at the age of 12. And my front teeth were already decayed and broken off at that point. Never said a word. She took me to one dermatologist when I was 15. By this time, my arms and my legs covered in open, infected sores. Didn't say a word. Told me I needed to take a bath, and then as we're leaving, she actually slapped my face and told me that how dare I be so horrible that I embarrass her so much. The school nurse, constantly going in with stomach aches and headaches and, not a word, not a report, not anything. Neighbors, the participants, the grown men that were at these parties, not a single person said a word. And sometimes, many times, you may not realize what's going on. They may not be all neglected and horrible like that. You may not realize, but there are those warning signs. Their behaviors, their grades, their changes in their looks and their hygiene. It's definitely going to be there. Like I said, mine's only one story. Go ahead, Andy. So what it did was it actually trained me to become a victim. As I grew up, I couldn't recognize dangerous people. I had no clue how to watch out for safe relationships and how to even function in a safe relationship. And many abusers, as you go into adulthood and you start developing these relationships, many of these abusers, they know within the first 15 minutes of having a conversation with you whether or not they can take control over you. You know what, why don't you go play that song over there on the jukebox instead of the one you were planning on playing? How about if I order you this drink instead of that drink? I like your hair parted over this way better than I do that way. They will use those little questions to see just how vulnerable you are and will you comply. That's just the beginning of it. I up until 37 years old, it was nothing but one horrible, violent nightmare after another. Being hogtied and barricaded in my home, to being almost drowned, multiples and multiples of weapons. The first time I had a weapon held to my head, I was 9, by my stepfather. Actually loaded the shotgun and pointed it right at my face. Told me I might as well kill you. So, weapons are a huge part of it. Many broken bones, many repeated head traumas. We talk about concussion issues for kids who wear football uniforms and helmets and all of that kind of gear. But if you are a person trapped in this kind of life, you are getting beaten on repeatedly, day in and day out for year after year after year. Concussion upon concussion. Can't even tell you how many I had. Shame, blame, no social interactions, definitely no friends. Any employment was absolutely controlled. I had to go and come with them. Not allowed to have my own money, my own bank account, my own identity. Anything that I had as a human being was of service to others. That's the way that I was raised, and that's the way that I fell for and continued to serve those who abused me year after year. Shame, blame, some of the, comments went from, you should be so grateful that I love you. You'll never make it without me. Of course, my all-time favorite, you enjoyed that stuff they did. I only shared my little piece of my story with 2 men in my life, and never again. Well, the one I have now I do, so we'll go on with that. But it really took up almost 4 decades of my life. And I had 3 children, 2 divorces, but a total of 6 different abusers. Go ahead. So what was I left with? Me as an emotional mess. Didn't even develop as a normal human being. I had addictions with alcohol, marijuana, opiates. Then the first psychiatrist that I went to go see put me on Xanax, and it became my best friend for 25 years. It was my best friend. Mental illness. Who wouldn't have some kind of mental illness after living this kind of life, right? Even a portion of this kind of life. You would suffer from depression, constant fear, anxiety, hypervigilance. You would be so afraid to even speak. I used to be so mousy. I never would have stood up on this stage. Never. Never would have told anyone about my story. That was not part of the program. My behaviors were very submissive. I was definitely very silent and fearful of absolutely everyone and everything, because to me, everyone meant bad. And there was nothing I could do about that. Go ahead. So the children, I had a boy and 2 girls. They are my shining stars today. But unfortunately, with their father and their stepfather, they lived in that nightmare until my son was 13 years old. You know, their father would beat on them. Their stepfather would beat the crap out of me on a regular basis. You know, it could be daily, it could be weekly, it could be over dinner not being right or just not being served to him right. They grew up constantly fearful. My son, he's amazing. He's an outstanding artist today and chef. But he became a fierce protector. When the fight would start in the house with their stepfather, he would actually take my daughters and hide them in the closet. Little bitty brave 11-year-old boy stand there and just take charge of the situation. Nobody gonna touch my sisters, right? And I had taken, it was one of the last beatings that I got from him, and whenever I'd take them grocery shopping with me, if they were all good, they could get something out of the gumball machine, and he was able to, that day he got lucky, and you used to be able to get these little 1-inch pocket knives, you know, very, very dull blades, but little 1-inch pocket knives, and serving dinner, and something wasn't right, and, you know, I'd come, and the fight started, and going in to calm my babies down so they can eat dinner. And the first thing my son did was look over at me and reach into his pocket and pull out that little knife and, "Don't you worry, Mom. Next time I'm gonna get him." That was my point that I knew I absolutely had to start finding a way to get away from this, to make sure that I could do something to change the influence that it had on my children's lives. They witnessed sexual acts when they were small and after the divorce with their father. They went through their own sexual abuse with stepmother and stepbrothers. They learned negative coping strategies, just like I did. They didn't recognize the wrong in people, and they will still give 150% of themselves to anyone. And trust me, I keep trying to tell them, save a little bit for yourself. But that's the cycle. That submissive behavior, that nature of that depression, that anxiety, that fear, that ongoing anxiousness, and that distortion in their relationships. So if you think about teens in homes today, what they may be going through, and as they start these dating relationships in high school, how dangerous is that going to be for them? Please. This I just wanted to show you real quick. I'm only going to point out a couple of things. In 2015, Illinois DCFS indicated 2,800 sexual abuse. Overall, nationally, they can confirm 1 in 9 are sexually abused. But in 2012, Congress made a statement that for every 1 report of sexual assault that is made, at least 6 others are not. So multiply that number by 6. Some of the situations that they had confirmed 49 child trafficking cases. Confinement and tying up, they had 52. Sexually transmitted disease was huge. Lockout runaway kids. Brain and skull traumas was 141. The list, fractures, torture, the list goes on and on and on. So it's happening still today. And that doesn't even top where the distress of economic or difficulties or mental illness or addictions or even past trauma that the parents have gone through that's going to initiate them to then use their kids. It's easy to exploit kids on the internet today, unfortunately. Please. So just some confirmations. The biggest part is that parent, step-parent, paramour, and sibling were the greatest number of offenders against kids. When you get into other babysitter and adoptive parent, you only come up with about 500-600 people. But you have close to 1,300 that are immediate family offenders. That's where the greatest source stems from, according to what they have. Please. So the Centers for Disease says that 1 in 4 homes are dealing with some kind of abuse right now, this moment, every single day. 1 in 4. Figure out where you live, figure out the homes around you. Don't care if it's an apartment, trailer, doesn't matter. 1 in 4. National Institute of Mental Health says 1 in 5 adults suffer from some form of mental illness. A lot of it is connected to past trauma. Department of Human Services, again, can confirm 1 in 9 children sexually abused. What about those that never get help, that nobody ever makes a report on? The Department of Justice estimates that 85% of incarcerated persons have gone through some type of childhood trauma which led to that life-distorted path. The National Institute of Drug Addictions, 87% of substance use is related to that type of trauma. Please. So, although they want your help, they're going to be very, very silent. They're going to be fearful. That shame, that judgment, your judgment, not knowing what you're going to think of them to go and verbalize these things. How do you even begin to vocalize such acts? Who do you even talk to about it? The biggest fear for kids, DCFS and law enforcement, because they know that if they talk about what's going on, DCFS is probably more than likely going to have to remove them rather than removing the offender. Because of course you've got investigation and court and all of that before anybody's sent away. So it's the child that gets displaced, which puts them into a whole nother system of the welfare system. The abuse trafficker, the different types of control and harm and threats and drugs, even the fear of that abuser's abandonment. If they've been the only person that that person has ever had any contact with, if it is their parents, that's their biggest fear. Trust, language skills, language barriers. We have a lot of immigrants and migrant workers around here that come through. Language barriers. I don't speak Spanish, you know. Cognitive barriers, minimizing what happened. I did that for ages. What will happen? Where will I go? How will I survive? Where will I live? If you are an adult and you have children, what about where you're going to live? Who's going to support your kids? Because there's a lot of moms out there that allow a lot of, or shall I say, a lot of parents that allow a lot of horrible things to happen, either to have a partner or to be dependent for housing and food and so on and so forth. Keeping communities engaged with awareness events like this, using social media, rural areas. I'm from Breeze, so a lot of little towns around us, and I know you know them as well. You know, a lot of ways, the only way that you can reach them is through social media. And initiating those conversations daily. We want to empower them, we want to encourage them, and we want to educate as many people as possible. So, your concern matters. Your response matters. Your help matters. Providing resources or calling a hotline matters. Listening to me up here tell you my story matters. Your courage. I can't tell you enough how much it would mean. What if somebody would have done, what if just one person would have changed my life path? Think of my children and my grandchildren. That's 2 generations that you would have saved those lives. That's a huge, empowering feeling, right? So, anything is possible so long as you're in the active equation. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening. I hope that I didn't upset anyone too much, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I know that's heavy. Let's go ahead and invite our panel speakers up if they want to come up, and I will introduce them. So my name's Annie Shoemaker. I am one of the directors and founders of Eden's Glory, which is a safe house about an hour from here. We serve survivors of human trafficking. So the story that you heard, we hear that on a daily basis from women in this area, from women around the country, and just constantly facing that. But we have seen over the years of doing this work that there are resources, there are things that we can do, and just your response again tonight is huge because we can gather the community. And we had that similar response in our community when our community said, wow, this is here. And I come from a very small town, but the community said we want to do something. And so I just encourage you as you leave tonight, what are you going to do? What is your action step? So we want to hear from your local people, kind of what, and just have some conversation. So one of the things that we see, so Jason, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jason McFarland. I'm the Chief of Police at the Effingham Police Department. I've been a police officer in Effingham for over 20 years. I've been your police chief about the last 6 months. It's been a big learning curve, but early in my appointment as chief, I talked to Carol Gaspis, who told me the task force she was on with human trafficking. And although that was an issue that we dealt with in the past, I never realized the community involvement that was available for it. So thanks for letting me be here tonight.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks. And then Nikki, do you want to introduce yourself?
And I'm NIKKI QUANDT. I'm the Executive Director at Heartland Human Services, our local mental health center here in Effingham. I've been there a little over 3 years. Actually, not quite 3 years, I guess. I've been in the child welfare and juvenile justice and social services field for a little over 20 years, even though I look like I'm not that old in either district. But I'm happy to be here tonight. Hopefully we can give you a little bit of information. You do have packets. So please take those with you, share those with your friends and family, and use those to start the conversation that we all need to have.
Awesome, thanks. And those of you who are on the task force, will you raise your hands really quick just so that people have kind of eyes and a face? So these are people that you're going to want to reach out to after tonight about what you can do locally. These are the local people who are responding, so thank you to each of you. So some of the things that we talk about when we go and do trainings is that we need to respond to the vulnerabilities. So every community has different vulnerabilities. So what we have found from different trainings that we've gone to, as well as the women that we serve, is that some of the vulnerabilities are people that don't have a safety net, people who are, we talked about this, immigrants, people who are living in poverty, family instability, as well as family loyalty, childhood abuse, insecurity, kids who are bored, kids who are willing to take risks, anybody who has access to internet, major highways, kids who run, foster kids, and anyone living in addiction. So could you guys share with us what you see locally of those vulnerabilities? Are they here? Are they in Effingham? And how do you see it show up?
Can you hear me without the microphone, or need to use a microphone?
No, I can't.
Okay. Okay, I'm not a big fan of microphones. In the Effingham community, we the vulnerable crowd would be, we do see the habitual runaways. They're classically called throwaway children because at some point they run away so often the parent quits reporting them as missing. So law enforcement never looks for them. And from a law enforcement perspective, we'd have teenagers who run away every week. And you'd spend 5 or 6 days trying to find them, and as soon as you did find them, you'd bring them home, they would promptly run away. And these are the children that are also dealing with the addiction issues of substance abuse. They're also didn't have a good, stable home life to start with, nothing to model after, and they're just beginning their journey in destructive behavior. And we do see that, I wouldn't say regularly in Effingham, but it's not an uncommon occurrence.
Where do they run? Because in our community, we found that when our kids ran, they ran to our truck stop. And so there was an organization that developed a protocol in response to that. Where do you know, are there areas that kids run to?
Generally, they have a contact they're going to, so they may have an out-of-town boyfriend that'll come pick them up. Usually they don't go that far from home. We've had occasions where they go to Chicago or St. Louis, but usually it's somewhere within the county.
Within the county, yeah, okay. What else are you seeing of that list?
I think another thing, at Heartland we serve about 2,000 people a year, and if you ever see any advertising for our local United Way, you would know that 1 in 3 people in our community are affected by organizations served by the United Way. So if you think about that, there are 22 partner agencies, so 1 in 3 people in our community would be considered in one of those vulnerable populations because they are served by an agency that's supported by the United Way, and all of us are not-for-profit agencies. So we each have different specialties, obviously, that we serve. We're a small town, so we don't have a lot of overlap, thankfully. But if you just consider 1 in 3 people, that's a lot of people in this room. So other vulnerable populations that we have a lot of grandparents who are raising grandchildren, or relatives raising relative children. And that may not seem like a vulnerable population, but when you consider many of them are living on a Social Security income, the kids often have some behavior issues because of what had happened at home, which ultimately led to them living with the relative. That's a big one that we have. Mental health is obviously something that we struggle with, and addictions. Gambling is becoming a bigger problem in our community.
One common theme that we hear from a lot of the women is, as children, that pressure to take care of their family. So when families are living in poverty, or there's instability, or they're living on a low-income budget, a lot of kids are encouraged to get a job in some capacity. And so parents may not necessarily know what that job is, but we hear from a lot of the women just that pressure of needing to help take care of their siblings, of their parents, of the home. Do you guys hear that in your kiddos?
We've had cases in the past where the children were out committing criminal acts in order to feed the parents' drug addiction.
Yes.
And feed the family. And
Yeah.
I know it's pretty obvious. You guys are in a corridor of multiple highways. I think almost every training I have gone to with the FBI, Effingham comes up as just a prime target. And it's also been interesting with the survivors that we have met. They could point to truck stops in your community of where they have been trafficked out of. But I think a lot of times the misperception that we hear too, because our community is right off of a highway as well, but we hear a lot of times, okay, so it's the people coming through, right? It's all the semis, which yes, that does happen. But I think at least our community really struggled with that idea that it's literally next door.
Right.
And so when we had local cases coming forward of mom selling her children, and the survivors that I have spoken to lived in this area, lived near here, and so it's certainly the highway, but it's also the homes. It's the familial trafficking is the term that we often use because of that family loyalty. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask is, as we've gotten to know each other, you guys are on the task force, and Trish, you can speak to this too. as you guys heard her story, as you've heard other stories, what are identifiers? And maybe it maybe wasn't a case, but almost every time I go do a training, I have somebody come forward and go, oh my gosh, that kind of fit in with the description. Have you guys had that happen where you go, I don't know, we don't know for sure if it was trafficking, but it hit some of those identifiers?
Well, Trish was telling her story. I couldn't help but when she get into point after point, in the back of my head is, I've seen that, I've seen that, I've seen that. Now, it's never been to the extent to which she described, thankfully, but I think that does go to point on the amount of people that will be vulnerable to that are in a similar situation.
Right, exactly. What about you, Nikki?
Yes, we do. We have about 9 therapists at Heartland, and every day, I would say, each of them would tell you that they have people that they see who hit many of these points. You know, you really can't drive down the street in Effingham, downtown, you see people sitting on the bench, on the park bench, and they're the same people sitting there every day, aren't they, Jason?
Yes.
We know who they are, and they're there not because they're bored, not because they want to be, just because they don't have anything else to do, because they're ill and they need help. So we have lots of those people in our community, and it's time that we start talking about it.
Yeah.
I also know there was a sting operation, and when was it? It was in August. There was a sting operation, and victims and traffickers were found in your backyard. And so we know that the FBI does that on occasion, at least once a year. They're doing different sting operations around the country, and that was the closest I had heard that number of cases that were identified and found. So it very much, again, hits what we hear from the women, that yes, it's happening, yes, it's here. I remember one law enforcement telling me, anytime, if you have addiction and if you have poverty in your community, you're going to have human trafficking.
You have trafficking. We actually, I live up by Breeze, as I said. 64, they put a new Love's right by New Baden. There was a situation that happened at New Baden. Truckers Against Trafficking made the report, called in, stayed on site, as they are certified to do. The law enforcement showed up, St. Clair County. As I said, I speak to St. Clair County, so I know that they are being trained in human trafficking. Also, New Baden officers showed up. Rather than separate each person and talk to them and ask for IDs, and actually start talking to them about why they were there and get the report from the trucker. Actually, it became a conversation of, oh, where are you from? Oh, we're from Florida, we're driving up, just kind of cruising. 5 girls, 1 guy, okay? Didn't ask for IDs on each person, didn't do this, didn't do that. I didn't receive the call on it till 2 weeks later after the fact. So but they were just allowed to, okay, see you later, bye, go on up to the next truck stop. And there were 5 people that could have possibly been helped right there. And it's that close. That was scary to me. I know a lot of displaced kids that are moving around from home to home trying to survive. They are in danger, so.
So Jason and Nikki, maybe you can speak to us. What do you need? So we know that you, both of your agencies are overworked, underpaid, and overwhelmed, right? And so, but I think what we found in our community was it was really helpful when local people started coming forward and having the eyes in it, because you guys see, your teachers, your youth pastors, your parents, your educators, your business owners, you see things more. So what can we do as a community to watch, to notice, to help you?
First, okay. That's a good point, and we are overworked, I'll give that, but we are very fortunate. I have friends in similar communities throughout this region, and when we talk about the problems facing our community, they're talking about the drive-by shootings, the violent crimes, the home invasions, and the reason they have that is when they go to investigate the crime, nobody will help them. The community doesn't want to get involved.
Right.
In Effingham, that's not the problem. We have community involvement. The community will not tolerate that behavior, so it allows us to be effective.
Awesome.
So
Yes.
what we need to do on our end is provide better education for the community so that when they see this, They know what they're looking at. In law enforcement, I can't count the number of times I've dealt with a situation and they went home in the back of my head, I bet that's probably what I've done, should have done. And the next time I did it better, but
Right.
that's just part of learning and
Right.
experience.
Right, yep.
He stole my answer.
Sorry.
We do need to educate each other, and that's why we're all here tonight, so thank you for coming. But we need to talk about it too. We have to change the conversations that we're having with each other, because we typically don't want to talk about things like this when we're out in a social setting with our friends or our family. This isn't something, it's heavy, like Annie has said, and Tricia said, it's heavy stuff. Sexual abuse is heavy stuff. Trafficking, all kinds of things. But we have to start the conversation, and only we're the ones that have to do that, because we're the ones that are now educated about it. So just opening yourself up to thinking about it and to being able to talk to your friends about it and say, did you know that the truck stop could be a place where people are trafficked? Because a lot of people don't know that. So just by saying that simple sentence to someone, you can open their eyes and help them to see that we can do something about it. We can. When we see something happening that's a little bit weird, if you get that gut feeling like, you know what, this doesn't feel right, it usually isn't right. So call, maybe not 911, but call the police department and just say, hey, you might not want me to tell them to do this.
911.
911. Okay, call 911.
We answer the phone
Get it
24 hours a
routed.
day,
24
7
hours a day, yeah, all the time. So do we. It's a little much sometimes, but call and say something. Anne has a comment.
Also, be taking pictures of license plates, and what other things should we be doing as citizens to help with evidence?
Anything you can get as far as identifying features, license plates, vehicle descriptions, last known to travel will be beneficial. Really, whenever we encounter situations like this, it's just like Trish said. It's stuff we do every day, like domestics. So when you, as a citizen, may report what's suspicious behavior, and we get these calls 20 times a day, and usually it's nothing, but it's important to communicate what you're seeing to the dispatcher so it gets to us, because sometimes it gets lost in the translation. You know, a suspicious person may be a homeless person that's been outside of business for 6 hours and they want to move on. Or a suspicious person could be somebody, you know, engaged in this type of behavior, burglary. And so whenever you're calling this in to let our dispatchers know, be specific about what you're seeing and what you think this is, so that way when the officer arrives on scene to investigate, he kind of knows what you know.
What are some of your questions? We've got 10 minutes, okay.
I have never been to anything like this, so I just want to say that I've learned, I thought trafficking was mobility.
Right.
Taking them someplace, taking them to, you know, another state, but you're calling it trafficking, and you stayed right in your home.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of, and, yeah, thank you.
I'm not good with mics either. I really am not. I help a lot of survivors from many different countries and across this country. And almost every survivor that I talk to has a similar home experience to mine. Almost every single one. I know that the Central Illinois Task Force, 100% of the victims and survivors that have passed through, 100% have had the same or similar situations. It's all been familial related.
I mean, I just would have called that what you had, abuse or something, but
We used to
trafficking-
call it, we used to assume that it was just being shared. We were just doing what we were ordered to do. So it used to be termed, for survivors, we were just being shared, okay? I didn't know what it meant to be sold for a glass of beer or for a couple of bucks. I had no clue what that meant. Trafficking is a word that developed like 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago, I think, but it's a new word, so we're getting familiar with it, and that's why these events are so important. So, getting that word out.
But trafficking can mean what I thought also. I mean, you can go and be mobile and go around the
And
country,
you
yes.
do a lot with those.
Yeah, so the basic definition of trafficking is when you take a person and you sell them for the purpose of sex or labor, and there's a profit in it. So it could be I'm selling them for housing, or I'm selling them for drugs, or I'm selling them for cash. And it can be mobile. We have women that have been moved around the country, and then we've also had women who are literally just, and children and boys, who are literally just sold out of their homes. But usually there's that similar tie where it started with family, and then maybe they escape from that and then end up being sold by a boyfriend or a quote-unquote pimp.
And then I had one more thing. So I work with truant students, and when I'm trying to talk with them and just trying to get information from them, I know they're holding back because they're scared of the DCFS or the law. And I totally get that they don't want to tell me, and kind of rightfully so, because they told me something, I'd have to report it.
Right.
But I still try to make that connection, and it's just a difficult place to be, theirs and mine, because I get that they don't want to tell me, but I'm still trying to be helpful. But I understand, and they might get in trouble, then it might open up a whole nother can of worms, and so it's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough, so I understand that you're like, oh gosh, I wish someone would have said something, I wish some. But I mean, I'm thinking of my kids, and I'm like, oh, maybe that one, maybe that one. But like just to report it or just to say, oh, I know for a fact, you just don't know.
And in those situations, it's about the relationship.
Yes.
So just develop that relationship with that child, and eventually, hopefully they will say something to you. And look on that tip sheet and see how many boxes do they check.
Right.
And if they check a lot, it may be worth a phone call to let DCFS decide or let the police decide if there is something there. But I can't emphasize enough how important that relationship is, because until they trust you and know that you're a safe person, they're not going to open up to you.
I know, but then I'm the safe person. Oh, but I still called DCFS. I usually wasn't safe.
And usually kids know that. They know that you're gonna have to do that. Most of them are smart enough to realize
Yes.
that, but I think Trish probably has something to say about
Letting
that.
them know that you're gonna help them through the DCFS process, that it doesn't have to be as scary as what they think it is, and that they are worth saving, that they don't have to go through these things, that no person has to go through these things. A few things for teens, we've been really trying to reach our teens locally up in Clinton County. And one of the things is looking for an extra cell phone or finding out what their boyfriend or girlfriend is asking, because that "if you love me" is a very powerful word whenever you're talking teenagers and relationships. So a lot of things can start to happen, but if they've got repeated things going on, just keep that relationship going and let them know you're going to help them and that it's not going to be as scary as they think.
We've also found too that when we go in and do a lot of trainings in schools, and so I will almost put it off as if you see a friend that this is happening to, they get less defensive, and then I'll say, go talk to your teacher. And hopefully I've already had that conversation with the teacher to prep them, but I think that helps too from an outside person of just, I'm just telling you what I've seen and how this happens and what it looks like in a non-scary way, but giving them some, and then they kind of, almost every time I've done that, we've had kids raise their hands and say, oh, yeah, that happened. And so then it helps, but it almost be a good friend, and then they can report it without feeling like they're in danger.
Was
Other-
your real father abusive to you?
No. My mother and real father divorced when I was 3. I had a great relationship with him. I actually, whenever my stepfather and my mother got married, he refused to let me have any more further contact with my father or any of the MCKNIGHT family at all. And moved from where they knew that we were up to Freeburg. And apparently, because we had moved like 5 different times in the time that we lived in Freeburg, I guess I was hard to find. I don't know. But no, there was absolutely a drop. But I had a great early childhood relationship with my entire MCKNIGHT side of the family.
Never had contact again with him?
When I was an adult, when I had children. So my dad did get to speak to his grandchildren before he passed. So that was good.
So two questions. One about the school, like right now in the public school system, are the teachers trained and administrators trained in what steps to take? And the second question tied into it, are the laws for the state of Illinois appropriate? Are they fair to get something done? Two things I have.
Let me just, real quick, we're working on school education and training. CASE up in Chicago has a platform that is directed for Illinois schools and students. We're trying to modify some issues and working into the different schools up in Clinton County, but every school district is working on their own, and a lot of the services go out to the schools. So that, yes. The statute of limitations, I pushed the bill to update the statute of limitations for involuntary servitude and sexual servitude of a minor in Illinois. They now have 25 years after their 18th birthday. It used to be 1 year after their 18th birthday. So can you imagine trying to be 19 and just getting away from your parents and trying to report this or even talk to anybody about it, right? Not gonna happen. Now, for any sexual offense against kids, most of it is a 0 statute of limitations, but involuntary servitude, sexual servitude, or trafficking in persons of a minor is now 25 years minimum statute of limitations.
And on the federal end of that, in 2000, the federal government enacted the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is a federal law, and since a lot of these cases do go over state lines and the FBI does work closely, that's the law they use, and I know of cases where that's been prosecuted on a federal level that people have gotten life. So local agencies, our working relationship with our federal partners is very important in cases like this.
And for our local teachers, our task force is working on a training in January, I think.
January it's going to be at St. Anthony's Hospital. It's going to be for clergy and for teachers or teachers' aides, anyone that works with little kids. So more to come.
Yes.
Last question, then let's wrap it up.
Just driving around, sometimes you see a house that's kind of boarded up. Now, is that something to kind of, you know, to notify the police because you think, God, you don't ever see the kids are maybe outside playing, but everything else is boarded, and they only got 2 hours out and then they're in the house, you know.
And that's touching on a much broader issue than this trafficking. That would get into the actual abuse and neglect statutes. So if you see something like that, and neglect can be poor environmental conditions, that the windows are broken, they are boarded up, that it doesn't have sufficient heating. So when you do see something like that, yes, do give us a call because we will respond, we will investigate, we will contact DCFS if needed, and we'll do what we have to protect the children.
All right.
But a majority of the sex trafficking occurs online advertisements.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 out of 4 child victims say they were advertised online.
Yes.
Every day, there's 100,000 new ads put on the internet. And what this service allows us to do is go into this, and there's 1,400 agencies using this, and we're allowed to pull all these ads and put it to a geographical area. And I can tell you what's going on in Effingham, Coles County, Champaign, and it also allows us to coordinate with our other agencies where they may have previous contacts. So when the 5 girls were found in St. Clair County, if an officer in Florida were encountered them, that would be able for a way to us to communicate to know, okay, this is what happened there.
Mm-hmm.
So if we didn't get them that time, hopefully we can get them the next. And this online web-based database, so far, and it's been in existence for 5 years, they've identified over 14,000 children, over 35,000 different victims of human trafficking, and identified 10,000 traffickers. And unfortunately, in this day and age, it's all web-based.
Right.
Where you're speaking of trafficking at the truck stops, that was always on the CB when I got my hired in 2000,
Right.
and now it's all internet.
Yeah.
So that's the trend we're looking at.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Just to close out, one more comment here real quick on if you know, we have 6th graders that are being given cell phones with unlimited access to internet. They are playing video games, they're going on to Snapchat, they're doing what all of their friends are doing. The FBI provides a top 10, top 15 dangerous apps for predators. And you can always go online, check that out. Snapchat, TikTok, help me out here. There's WhatsApp, whatever. There's a lot of them out there. Fortnite is one of the serious games that they have found predators in. If there's a game out there, if it's an online connection, there are predators because they have unlimited time to search for vulnerable children and for vulnerable adults that need money and need things and are having arguments with their parents or their friends or in depression or economic distress. It's there. And it is so easy. It's a click of a button. And the next thing you know, they're meeting someone somewhere or they are planning for them to come to their house, or those scenarios happen every single day, probably 1,000 times a day, if not more. So if you're giving a 6th grader and a phone with full internet, or they're just sitting there playing games, guaranteed they're going to come in contact with predators. Let them know they need to be smart enough to know what a predator will do, that absolutely nothing is for free, and especially from a stranger online. Nobody is going to give you that S10 iPhone for free. Nobody is going to get you those concert tickets that mom and dad won't let you go to for free. Nobody is going to come and take you and rescue you, because that doesn't happen. They're looking to pull you away. Those are some really key points to have with your kids, with any dating person. So it's a very vulnerable area when you get into internet and what's available, what actually happens there.
We know that we dumped a lot of information on you, and just want to tell you that if any of this you're like, oh my gosh, I want to know more, reach out to the task force, because we want to line up a variety of different trainings, whether it's internet safety for parents and what you should watch for on your kiddos' phones, or internet safety for kids, or talking with educators. And so reach out to the task force and say, hey, I have a group, or I have people, or I have an interest in this, I have connections with this, and we'd love to kind of keep working to educate this community. So thank you.